Good morning, everyone. Hello.
Morning.
Morning, how are you?
Hi, afternoon. This is on the work that ISLA has been doing for the last couple of years, and a project that started around 2014 and has continued to grow and develop over the years. And I'm just going to get straight into it and introduce our panel of experts. The first person on our panel is Annette Van Gogh. She works with us at ISLA, and we are very excited to have her here. She manages our Feminist Litigation Network, and she is excellent, and she's joining us all the way from Kenya, and we're so excited to have her here with us. We also have on our panel Dr. Sharona Sekala and Rumba Zidube, and I'm not going to take much time with each person. I'm just going to ask each of them to introduce themselves to us and tell us a little bit about their work in this area of raising feminist litigators. I'm gonna hand over first to Annette.
Thanks, Nobukosi. Good afternoon, everyone. I thought we were going to let our visitors go first, but I can go first. My name is Annette Van Gogh. As Nobukosi mentioned, I'm the Feminist Litigation Network Manager. The work that I've done with the network is to ensure that we're able to provide timely capacity strengthening litigation support, as well as institutional strengthening support to our network partners. This also includes the process of recruitment, the process of trying to identify the network partners that we understand would greatly benefit from our way of working. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Dr. Sharona, would you please introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sharona Sekala, and I'm an associate professor of global health law at the University of Warwick. So I've worked with ISLA and Mrina Manji on the African Feminist Judgment Project, and that seeks to reimagine judgments that have been made in Africa within a feminist lens to really kind of ask the woman question. So what if the judge in this case was thinking about women, would they have come up to a different outcome? So that's still an ongoing project, and I'm really excited about the work that ISLA is doing on training feminist lawyers as well. Thanks.
Thank you, and Rumba, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rumba Zidube. I'm a human rights lawyer from Zimbabwe. I've worked with ISLA in the past 6 to 7 years, supporting their litigation institutes, particularly in training women lawyers and building this network of feminist lawyers on litigating women's human rights cases at a regional level, building on my experience working at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So sort of like sharing my experiences working with the Commission and how African feminist lawyers can bring cases before similar regional human rights institutions. But outside of that, I've also done quite a bit of work on women's human rights in and around the continent of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Rumba. And so we're going to just jump straight into our conversation. And my first question is going to be for Annette. I'm hoping everyone, when they registered for the link, had an opportunity to go and look at our publication. And if you haven't, this conversation is going to give you a tantalizing highlight of what you're going to find. And I hope that you will follow all the links on our social media pages and actually read this amazing in-depth publication on the journey that it has taken to create a feminist litigation network. And I'm going to start with you, Annette, and just ask, what was ISLA's motivation behind starting a feminist litigation network? Well, it's called FNL now, but it had a different name at the beginning. And you can give us that journey of why it was important and how did we get here to this stage where we are with the FLN network.
Thanks, Nobu. So ISLA, from its analysis, from its consultations with partners, and from its experience in undertaking strategic litigation, both regional fora and domestically, did realize that there was a dearth of women litigators who were undertaking strategic litigation themselves. There was also a dearth of cases that were being referred to the regional human rights systems. And there was also the analysis that a lot of organizations that were undertaking strategic litigation were more equipped to do legal aid service provision, which means that they were excellent at providing direct services to the client, but the process of developing strategic litigation cases, which have a wider impact beyond the client, needed specific training, it needed specific resources. And so the Women's Human Rights Network, now the Feminist Litigation Network, the renaming was also political, decided to establish itself as an anchor hub institution. So it developed a network of developed relationships with a whole group of organizations, and with it also lawyers who were embedded in the organizations to undertake strategic litigation. And the way in which it did this is through capacity strengthening activities. As Rumba Zidube pointed out, we undertake litigation institutes, which are based on the implementation of a 3-year curriculum that are focused on both the theoretical and practical knowledge that is needed to undertake strategic litigation on violence against women and women's land and property rights. Of course, we've now expanded our women's land and property rights program to include women's socioeconomic rights, but initially in the pilot phase, since that's what we're focusing on today, we did focus on women's land and property rights. The other places in which we deemed fit to look at was ensuring that after the litigation institutes, that the lawyers were able to identify and also develop cases. So other than capacity strengthening during litigation institutes, something else that we did accomplish during the pilot phase was to ensure that we were able to support the cases. So that means being advisors to counsel, providing legal research, or joining to cases as amicus, and just ensuring that whatever support that the lawyer needed, that they were able to get it from our experts, but also through ISLA's strategic litigation unit, who are also experts in their own right.
Thank you for that. That is so interesting because as we all know, the challenges that come with litigating issues that affect women are made even more real by the fact that we don't have enough women as litigators. And this publication, this insight, goes into depth into the experiences of women litigators trying to be briefed on cases and the assumptions that go around the ideas that their male counterparts are better. And so this work that ISLA started doing is so important. And I'm going to move to you, Rumba Zidube, and ask you, in your experience, what is it that makes a litigation network like this unique? What makes it necessary on the continent? In light of what Annette shared about how they did it, what makes it necessary?
Thank you. So, I mean, for us to understand what makes it necessary, we need to begin with understanding what feminist lawyering itself is, right? Like, what do we mean when we talk about creating feminist lawyers? We're basically talking about building a network of individuals, right, who are interested in scrutinizing and transforming laws. Particularly, we know that laws affect women in the workplace, in the family. And so what we're trying to do is to build this network of people who then look at these laws and try and transform them substantively, right, through litigation, through legal reform. We are also talking about the ways in which these kinds of legal inquiries are actually framed, the ways in which the legal arguments that are made in these cases are designed, right? So feminist lawyering itself is about using the law as an instrument, right, for challenging these systemic inequalities and inconsistencies that we see in our daily lives. But a lot of women do not know how to actually, transcend these challenges. And so this type of lawyering then becomes an instrument, right, for persuading and trying to convince this very rigid system that's been constructed basically on the ideas and sensibilities of men, right? Who are the legislators who sit in parliament because of the structure of our politics. Men who sit as judges and magistrates because of the structure of our society and who gets to occupy certain positions. And then the men who are predominantly the lawyers who are arguing these cases. So whatever you find within the jurisprudence of national courts, of national judicial systems, in terms of the legal instruments that you find within the different countries, pretty much all of them are built and constructed on the sensibilities of men and their experiences. And they do not take into account the experiences of the marginalized. And when I say marginalized, I mean women and other groups of individuals who are not read into the text of the law and thus not reflected, right, in the ways that the law itself develops within our different countries. So when we then trying to do this kind of feminist lawyering, we're using the instrument of the law to give validity to women lawyers' lived experiences, right? We're saying, as women lawyers, we have also experienced what patriarchy looks like, what marginalization looks like, what oppression looks like. And so we're using our own lived experiences. And in fact, they are continued living experiences, right? It doesn't end simply because you've become a feminist lawyer and you are aware of your rights and you can defend them. You still get to experience the same kinds of oppressions and barriers that every other woman faces, except that now you're more aware of how to go about it and how to sort of navigate around it. And so when we create this space where we have these feminist lawyers, we're saying, look, our lives as women lawyers are also a kind of, I would say, legitimate site of knowledge production. We're bringing our experiences and saying, this has to be part and parcel of the letter of the law, of the substance of the law, of the ways in which laws are interpreted and used and understood and can transform the way we live our lives. And feminist lawyering is also about, we're trying to transform communal knowledge systems, right? We're not just doing the litigation and the strategic litigation, but we're also doing a lot of consciousness raising and raising of awareness, where we're really sort of building new ways of knowing what we thought we already knew about the law and the ways in which it functions in our societies. So if I may use an analogy, you know, if Steve Biko's Black consciousness movement was about creating a critical mass, right, of self-aware Black people who would defend their own humanity, right? And also, you know, reflecting back on white supremacy about how fundamentally flawed it was and how illogical it was in perpetuating racism. Feminist lawyering is similar to that kind of thinking, right? It's about building a critical mass of feminist advocates who are, as they reflect, sort of as they're becoming self-aware and challenging these norms and values and systems, they're also at the same time reflecting back their ideas and thinking and the ways in which they're transforming the way people understand the law back onto this patriarchal society and sort of making it aware of its own ridiculousness and how some of the things that women experience through the law and the letter of what we call the law, it just doesn't make sense, right? And I love how this particular feminist legal theorist called Catherine McKinnon talks about feminist lawyering as about challenging what she calls the invisible grip of male epistemology, right? So basically what we see within the law are standards set by men, right? I spoke about this before, the legislators, the judges, the lawyers. And these standards that they set about what according to them is believable and what isn't, right? So when we are bringing the lens of the feminist lawyer, we're asking at which point or what is it that makes us believe that a woman has been sexually abused, right? Because the logic of hypermasculinity, which is led by men, who tell us that it isn't rape if the two are married, if they were on a date, or if she went to his house willingly, if she was wearing something he thought was inviting, if she presented herself in spaces where she should have known, you know, that she wouldn't be safe, right? And yet when we bring the feminist lens, we're saying none of those things shouldn't matter. What matters is, were her rights violated? Did she consent to this particular act? And if the point that we ask, was there consent, the response is no, then a crime has been committed, right? And with other issues, like when a woman murders someone who's been abusing her all her life, right? The logic of male privilege would tell us, well, I mean, cumulative abuse can't be considered as a basis for arguing either provocation or self-defense. But when the victim then snaps and kills a long-term abuser, right? What do the courts actually say? What does the law actually say? How would bringing about question of what does it mean for a woman to be perpetually abused and treated in this inhumane and degrading treatment over a certain period of time? What does this do to her psyche? What does this then mean in terms of how we change the way the law applies to her in that particular instance? And it's also about challenging these sort of intersecting ideas, right? For instance, capitalist accumulation, which is also built on white male sensibilities, which tells us that a person engaged in what they call productive or gainful employment, is the one making a financial contribution, right? That housework isn't work, and so a housewife shouldn't walk away with anything because she hasn't really contributed anything to the marriage. And so with feminist lawyering, in changing the substance of the law, we then coming along and saying, but how is housework not work? How is childbearing and child rearing and managing the house? How is cooking and cleaning not productive work? And why shouldn't that be monetized as well in the event that these two go their separate ways? And so that's basically what we're doing in terms of the substance of what we're trying to do with the group of people that we're building. Then at the regional level, we sort of, I guess there's a bit of a layered approach to it, because you're trying to build a group of individuals who do this work at the national level, but then they're also aware that should the mechanisms that exist at the national level fail, then there's another layer that you can actually explore that could still result in a remedy. Right. So at the regional level, if you bring in cases before the African Commission on Women and People's Rights or the African Court, or if you're even taking it to other bodies like the UN Committee of Experts on the Rights, UN Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, I'm conflating things here. You are bringing these issues that we see on a daily basis to shape regional or international jurisprudence, right? And in that way, you're sort of providing guidance to states on how they should implement their treaty obligations in terms of, the human rights treaties that they have signed and that they have agreed to be part of. But at the same time, you're also building these regional structures of solidarity, right? By creating the networks that can demonstrate that, one case that happens somewhere in Egypt where a group of women are sexually abused at a demonstration, and then they end up bringing a case before the African Commission, has the capacity to set the record, right, for all African women about what constitutes violence against women from a regional perspective. So a case brought from one country at the regional level has the ability to set a precedent for the rest of the continent in that particular way. So it makes it really important to have this kind of work happening at both at the national and at the regional level. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you, Dr.
I just have one point, sorry.
Yes, please.
I just have one point left, sorry for that. And you know that there are certain mechanisms that also exist at the international level, like amicus procedures. And one of the good things about the amicus procedure is it allows, if feminist lawyers actually use that particular procedure, it allows them to sort of infuse feminist critique into cases that, when you're just looking at them on the face of it, they don't seem to have anything to do with women's rights. And so if there's a group of individuals who've been trained in understanding how the system works, and then they actually use procedures such as the amicus procedure, then we can begin to build this jurisprudence. Yeah. So I would say the work that the Feminist Network is doing is important, both at the national level, because it's giving women an immediate remedy, right, at the level that they engage with on a daily basis, but also at the regional level, it allows for this much broader, much more coordinated effort by women from across the continent to build this jurisprudence that then helps in advancing some of the issues that women are constantly concerned about. Yeah.
Sure, thank you so much, Rumbizai. You've given us a lot to think about, and I'm glad that you highlighted essentially the two big areas that the Feminist Litigation Network really works on, which is the violence against women and issues around land and property rights. And we will just touch more on that a little later, and hopefully our participants will have questions on that. But what you have said is, this is the issue you've highlighted for us. These are the problems that we have. We have these male-dominated systems. We have these patriarchal systems that are not paying attention to the needs and the lived realities of women. And so for you, Dr. Sharifa, my question is really, if we break it down in its core essence, we see women graduating from law school. There are women in law firms, and every now and then there's a course on feminism and things like that people may take. But what are the lived challenges of female practitioners as they try to deal with these issues that Rumbizai has brought on, that we see them, we acknowledge them, we're aware of them, but it seems that there is these mountains that female litigators just really struggle to deal with, and as women lawyers to make the change that they want to. And so that's my question to you, Dr. Sharifa.
Thank you. So I think that's a fantastic question. So, and I think there are two answers to that. One is patriarchy, and the second one is that not every female lawyer is a feminist. So, and I'll deal with both in turn. So many female lawyers, so I went to Makerere, it was a fantastic law school, but it was really still steeped in patriarchy. So the feminist courses were the one thing that you went in order to hear radical women telling you tales. And it was not embedded in the curriculum as something that is core. And it could be, and that's one of the things that we try to do in the Feminist Judgment Project. We try to imagine a world where feminism is core to any of the issues that you will deal with in a law school. So it is core to contracts, it is core to trusts, it's core to land law. So it's core to kind of those experiences, and asking in every individual subject, whether it is a commercial transaction, would it be different if this was a woman at the other end? And I think that really gives you different responses if you do that, as opposed to thinking about feminism as the thing that is additional, that is for those loud, shouty women who are kind of a very radical and different. And I think we need to do more of that in law schools, so that the women lawyers we get are really thinking about feminism at its very essence, but also really thinking about the ways in which these, in some ways, these post-colonial systems have entrenched patriarchy as part and parcel of the ways in which we learn law. The fact that men are the bulk of the judges in these systems is not an accident. And we treat it as something that is accidental, but actually it is deliberate, and it entrenches something. Law schools themselves, so you have more girls at the moment than boys. Girls generally perform better, and this is both within the global north and the global south. Girls generally on average are doing better, but we are not seeing them as lecturers in law schools. We are not seeing them as judges. So there's something that's happening to those pipelines that I think we need to do more work on. And the second one is that when these women then themselves become lawyers, just because you're a woman does not make you a feminist. And that is actually quite critical, that we might have women who are making really bad decisions for other women, because these women might be thinking of them as individuals. So you might have a woman who's thinking of a land issue, and she's thinking about her own enrichment, the security of her children. But if you thought about systemically for other women who have no choices, you might come to a very different outcome in terms of how land decisions might be decided. You might think about tenure systems in a fundamentally different way from one where it is based on acquisition, of you owning your private property and you getting enriched, and therefore you have the security of tenure, because you're making fundamentally different decisions depending on which lens you look at. And I think that there is a whole lot there in terms of thinking, what is this woman question when we get to judgments? Are we talking about one individual woman, or are we talking about the outcomes for the majority of women who are dispossessed, who are in abject poverty, who have no rights? And I think that that's really important in terms of thinking about that. And I will take one of the examples around consent that Rumba Zidube gave around whether or not a woman consents might be different issue for a particular woman. And I think that in courts pitting this woman as the locus of decisions, we miss the much broader issues around consent. How safe are women at night? How safe are women in particular situations? Who believes women more generally? And I think that unless we ask those questions around societies of women, we get caught in a cycle where it is about one woman and believing this one woman and whether that one woman is trustworthy or not. And I think that that is a real problem. And the ways of addressing that is really what ISLA is trying to do, is to get not only women as lawyers, but making that integral step with the institutes to training women to think in a feminist way, to think in the structure way, because there is a huge difference between that individual case, kind of that microanalysis, and the huge structural problems that women face. And I think that that is really one of the fantastic things about both this project, but also the publication, because it really tries to highlight those huge structural issues that are really, really important.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Dr. Sharifa. So officially the space is open for questions. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put your hand up and we will give you an opportunity to ask your questions, or just type your questions in the box. I'm gonna circle back to you, Annette. And my question is, Dr. Sharifa just spoke and said, not every woman is a feminist. And I think that this is something that is so important. And I don't want us to just jump over that, because, you know, when you have conversations with men, just as she's highlighted, or people, and you say women's issues or issues that affect women disproportionately are not being handled, they'll say, oh, but women are graduating and women are in the law school, so what do you mean? Or sometimes when there's cases that affect women, and you will find that they will intentionally hire counsel that is female, so that you can say, oh, but a woman handled it, you know, so you can't say that it was biased against women. And so for you, Annette, in the Feminist Network, in the history of it, how has this work around building feminist litigators that are thinking strategically around broader systemic issues for women, how have you handled when you do have women who are not feminists, or women who do not subscribe to the ideas of broader justice for all women and to make it inclusive? And have you come across, the work in building this network, have you come across that? And how do you navigate those types of waters?
Thank you so much for that very important question, Nobukosi, because what Dr. Sharifa has highlighted is absolutely true. Not every woman is a feminist, and that's a huge misconception. So when we say even men can be feminists, well, congratulations. We all want to dismantle patriarchy. And so one thing I have realized, and many scholars have said this from the Global South, I'll just pick on Amina Mama, is that in the 80s, the gender agenda was co-opted and depoliticized to just mean, let's just do gender mainstreaming, etc. And what this does is that you just add a woman here and a woman there, and we expect the space to be transformed, which is absolutely false. There's no such thing as trickle-down gender magic to make all the bad things go away. There's no such thing. What we have observed with critical mass theory, as has been said, is that there needs to be a legitimate investment in the way in which we're thinking about deconstructing structures that have historically marginalized and excluded and othered people who should be protected by those structures, right? So at the point of thinking through the Feminist Litigation Network, which was previously named the Women's Human Rights Network, as I said, we had to make a decision to rename it because our work was political. We were going beyond liberal and neoliberal, English is hard, it came on a ship, let us decolonize, neoliberal tropes of thinking that as a woman, you want to occupy the space, and that means that we've all been liberated. There's nothing transformative about that. So admittedly, there's a lot of women who are interested in women's rights, women's human rights, litigating for the rights of those who have been othered, either by the basis of gender and sexuality, that do occupy the spaces. And what we try to do now is to have a very frank conversation about what we're trying to do within the network. That is, we're trying to dismantle patriarchy through the courts. That is a social change that we are looking for. We're not trying to replace a man or anyone, any systems of power that have been devoid for people who look like you in order for us to be in those spaces. We're not trying to do that. And so, of course, in the past, you've had people who have come to the litigation institutes and are like, this is not what I signed up for. And, we are aware that our work is political, maybe radical to some. What we are doing is revolutionary, using the courts as a tool for social change. And we're also centering people's voices who have been marginalized in the way in which we work with the movements, in the way in which we allow ourselves to be led by the movement. It is something that's quite radical. So you do have lawyers who don't quite understand this, because there is a critique to lawyering that it is too lawyer-centered when what you're trying to do is to create social change for the constituency or the people who are most affected by the violation. And so it's a bit of an uncomfortable conversation to have. And it's something that the lawyers themselves have to understand, that this is the kind of lawyering we want. We don't want predatory lawyering. We don't want guns for hire. We want people who understand that they are occupying a space just to ensure that the end goal, which is liberation for all, can be reached. They are not the saviors. We don't want to create the victor savior trope, which is what happens a lot of the time as well. They are just contributing to a movement that already exists using a particular tool. And so in the past, when we had this conversation, people have decided to opt out, which is all well and good. We're not in the business of converting people. I don't think that is useful for anyone. We're also not in the business of how do you call this, going to private law firms and recruiting you so that you can do the work for us. We want to be able to ensure that we have a shared understanding of the way in which the work should be undertaken. We want to ensure that we're on the same page. We're working collaboratively as movement lawyers who are part of a movement, and rather want to ensure that that's well understood. So one of the ways in which we've sought to do that is in the pilot phase, and I think this comes into the challenges and the lessons learned in the pilot phase, is that we had a conversation with the executive directors, between ISLA and executive directors, and perhaps a lot more time should have been spent with the lawyers who are actually doing the work, the lawyers who are actually sitting at the litigation institutes to explain to them that this is the kind of work we're interested in doing. So the relationship shouldn't have just been the executive director and ISLA. It should have also brought forth the lawyer who's actually going to be the one who's engaging in the work on a day-to-day basis, and also engaging with the social movements as well as the clients. They need to understand what exactly as they're signing up for. Do they even believe in the courts as being a site for social change? Because if they don't, it can be a situation of investing in a space where there's no return, if you know what I mean. So that's one of the ways in which we have sought to ensure that the lawyers are on the same page. But yeah, it can be tricky business, transnational organizing and partnerships, and just ensuring that we understand that organizations do have their own strategic objectives, the lawyers have their own career goals, their own politics, and we as well come with our own body of histories and our own goals. And we just hope to meet at the center of, we want to use the courts as a site, as a tool for social change. And the social change is dismantling patriarchy.
That's really good. And my next question is to you, Rumba, in light of what Annette said. There is a phrase that was taught to me by an old professor of mine, Professor Gerald Lopez, and he is known for his book Rebellious Lawyering, and he asserts that we are all problem solvers. You know, people are constantly solving their own problems. And as this report actually says, is that women have been solving issues over time. It's nothing new. Women lawyers have been fighting, they have been advocating. But what I want to ask from you, Rumba, is what makes this in this moment in time unique? This organizing of a feminist litigation network, of putting them together, you know, I don't want to answer the question, but what makes it unique and different from all the organizing and work that women have been doing, obviously, prior to an institute like this coming into play?
It's interesting that you asked me that question, because just as Annette was talking, I actually had an anecdote in my mind about what I would call, you know, like when she was talking about not every woman is a feminist, I was thinking actually some people will call themselves feminists, but there are boundaries to the extent to which they are willing to be feminist, right? To what extent are you willing to push across a feminist agenda, even in moments when you think it might be compromising your own individual interests? And I'll give an example of how building this network of individuals who understand that feminist lawyering, you know, as Dr. Sharifa said, is not about the individual woman, it's about the collective, right? And about understanding that what you're trying to transform is not a single instance of marginalization or of want or of need or of oppression. You're trying to transform a whole system, right? You're dismantling a system that perpetuates these kinds of events from happening consistently to a number of women. And I'll give an example of how this came to power in a situation that actually happened in my home country, Zimbabwe. So we have a huge women's movement. And for a very long time, one of the critical issues that women's movement has been fighting for is marriage law reform. And for many years, ever since I was a law student, way back in the 2000s, right? Marriage law reform was on the agenda of the women's movement in our country. And then sometime a couple of years ago, a bill was introduced that was going to change the ways in which the multiplicity of marriages in Zimbabwe disadvantages women, particularly the fact that women who are in unregistered customary law unions are the ones that are always left at a disadvantage, right? But it was interesting to note that the people, amongst the people that opposed that bill were people within the women's human rights movement, particularly because this bill would enable a woman who has lived with a man at any particular point, right, to be able to have property based on the length of the relationship and whatever contribution that she has made, she can prove. And the argument from a lot of the women was that this will benefit what we call in my country small houses, right? The mistresses, so to speak. And so this bill that could have resolved an issue that affects, I would say of the marriages in Zimbabwe, probably about 60% are not registered, right? So about 60% of married women are in unregistered customary law unions, and they would have benefited from this bill. But because for some people looking at this bill would have benefited mistresses, that whole process was derailed and that bill was thrown out, and up to now, that marriage law has not been reformed. So what we are talking about here is when you create a group of conscious individuals who will push an agenda, even in instances when you might think that your husband's mistress will benefit from the reform that you're introducing to parliament, you will not think of your individual instance and you will consider that who stands to benefit from this law at a much broader level, and in what ways are we actually transforming the way that we treat each other in this society using this law. So I think that's what makes a feminist litigation network unique. You are trying to build a group of individuals who understand the cause is bigger than themselves, the cause is bigger than their individual interests, is bigger than their own politics, right? It's about the broader politics of the interest group that they're trying to serve and the ultimate result that they're trying to achieve, which is this transformation of legal systems, processes, institutions, and instruments. Yeah.
That is excellent, Rumbidza. And being Zimbabwean myself, I remember when there was a lot of hoo-ha around this bill that was coming to empower the small houses. And we ourselves here at ISLA have also experienced, some women feeling that when you introduce legislation that could potentially benefit women who have been othered, women who are lesser than, women who have the proverbial scarlet A across their faces, that then, I'm feminist up until a point. I'm as feminist as it doesn't affect my personal space or anything that could, affect me, really. That's where my feminism ends. And then we ask ourselves, how feminist are you? And so my final question to you, before I start taking the participants' questions to you, Dr. Sharifa, is where do you see the future opportunities for this type of work? Where do you see the future of feminist litigation growing? And I want to focus on something that you touched on earlier, was the role of law schools and legal education. How can we begin to advance that, and where can we go forward?
So thanks. That's a fantastic question. So in some ways, there's scalar issues. So suddenly I think that law schools need to make feminist inquiry like a really central part of what they're teaching, so that feminist work is not something that is othered. So it's something that is really central to the experiences. And I mean, they owe it to their students. So if 50% of your students are women, then you need to change the kind of education that you're giving them so that it reflects their lived realities. And so we need to demand more of our law schools. So I think law schools have always been very hierarchical. They have always been places which in some ways teach social justice but do not practice it. And I think we need to make demands of them around the ways in which we change the nature of these inquiries and make feminist studies really central to the work of people in areas that are diverse, in commercial law, in contracts, in trusts, in really a large variety of subjects. And I think that the work that ISLA and other organizations are doing is really critical here of showing those links, because I think people just didn't get it. So I think about 10 years ago, people didn't get how you could have, for instance, feminist contract law. So feminism felt like something that was around violence against women. But even things like land didn't feel like a feminist issue. And the more we have reports such as these that really show how land is integral to people's lived experiences, but then from land, you also have knock-on effects in terms of whether or not people can contract, whether or not people can get loans from banks. It really makes it, all those issues that seem like they're not feminist issues become feminist in their very nature. And I think that that work is vitally important. But then networks like this are also important. So this feminist network, because it changes people from thinking on the micro level to a macro and systemic level around inequalities seriously. So around taking that feminist inequality much more seriously, so that people don't really kind of think about individuals anymore, and we really take the systemic more importantly. So when Rumzai was talking about marriage law, I was thinking about research I did around communities that were trying to agitate for human rights for HIV/AIDS populations. And again, the same issues kept coming up. If we allow to give human rights for women, then prostitutes will get will get these rights and sleep with our husbands. So it's really kind of a systemic issue, and an issue that doesn't really think about vulnerability and who is most marginalized. And I guess the last issue for me here is the Pan-African alliances. And again, ISLA is trying to do this work where we speak to each other across not just our countries, but recognize that these are common problems across the African continent, that the marginalization of a woman in Zambia or a woman in Kenya is important to the woman in Uganda, because we need collective responses, but we also need to pull our talents together so that we do not replicate the work, so that each of us does not need to find solutions to each individual problem, that we pull this work and use it to the best effect possible so that we can find these common solutions across the African continent. Because if we take seriously the fact that it's patriarchy that is the problem, this is a common problem. And therefore we need to do this collectively in order to find solutions.
Thank you, Dr. Sharifa. I'm going to open up the floor to our attendees to please feel free to ask your questions. And if you would like to verbalize your question, you may put your hand up and we will unmute you. Or if you'd like to ask your question, you can type it in the chat box, and there's a question and answer section as well. We would love to hear your thoughts and your questions, and our panelists is clearly more than well equipped to be able to answer these questions. There is a question from Favor, and I'm going to just ask that the tech team unmute you, Favor, and you ask your question.
Hello, thank you. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, Favor, we can hear you. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for organizing this webinar today. As a lawyer who doesn't, a feminist lawyer, although one who does not practice law or work in litigation, I found that I have resonated a lot with everything that has been spoken here today. And I just wanted to ask a few questions. And my first question is, how do lawyers, I'm from Nigeria, so I'm really interested in how feminist lawyers in Nigeria can get involved with your work. And I'm also curious to know if there is space for lawyers who, like myself, are not into litigation, but who can assist with legal research or work in that capacity, can also collaborate with you. And then I also wanted to ask, based on my observations in Nigeria, for instance, right from when you are the undergraduate level, you are told that there are no women at the bar, that we are all men here. And even when you go on to the law school, it's the same thing. You say they call female law students, what do they say? Women, gentlemen in skirts, and all kinds of all those ridiculous descriptions. And I have a theory that these phrases and this environment sort of makes it such that I think that this is a useful way to explain how or why many older female lawyers come to see themselves as participating in a boys' club and begin to identify less with women and violence against women, such that they are then more likely to approach feminist litigation or female oppression in a certain way. So I guess my question is, how do we veer away from this narrative? How do we begin to create from the very, in Nigeria, you first do your bachelor's degree in law for 5 years, then you go to law school for 1 year. So that's about 6 years of hearing these statements over and over again. How do we break the cycle? And then I'm also curious to learn if all over Africa and in the experience of our panelists, if the problem with the multi-plural system, legal system, if they've also experienced observed an issue with this. I think that it is very concerning that it is possible for a woman married under customary law to have fewer rights than a woman who is married under statutory law, and that many women are victims of violence and oppression because they are unaware that marriage under the Act grants them much more protections than marriage under customary law. And my final question is related to violence against female judges. I have observed in the past couple of years in Nigeria, there have been situations where the elevation of female judges to Chief Justice, for instance, or President of the Court of Appeal or to Supreme Court, or just allowing certain female judges to preside over cases, has been refused because they are not from the state, from that particular state, because of marriage or stuff like that. So I'm really curious if this is also the same, and if our panelists have had any experience dealing with these issues. And also, how do you deal with the problem of organizations such as FIDA, for instance, which are there are a lot of women lawyers in FIDA who support women, but who do not hold feminist ideals. In dealing with these people, because I volunteered with FIDA for a while in 2020, and they do seem to do a lot of work supporting women, but a lot of the female lawyers I worked with were not feminist at all. So how do you bridge this problem? I don't think I'm not sure how it is that we can I don't even know. But how do you think that this problem could be resolved? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much, Favor. So there's been a few, thank you for that really great question. There's been a few questions. So before I take any more questions, I'm just going to direct some questions to our panelists. I'm going to start with Dr. Sharifa can answer some of the substantive questions that Favor asked. And then I'm also going to ask after Dr. Sharifa has answered Favor's question, if Rumbidzai can please answer this particular question. Do you, and this is a question from M, would the marginalization of issues by women's rights movement also be linked to class aspects, such as the case in the marriage bill of Zimbabwe? And I'm assuming that this question is asking the way in which different women different women lawyers respond to different issues, so-called feminist lawyers. Is it a class issue as well? And a question that I will ask, these questions are directly for Annette, around how can a lawyer join the network? Is there room for non-litigating lawyers? And what are the focus areas of the network as it currently stands? I have a question here that asks about advocacy in digital tech for women. Is that something that the network would be interested in? So I'm going to start with Dr. Sharifa Rumbidzai, and then to you, Annette.
So thanks very much, Favor, for those questions. So I will deal with two questions. So one is about culture in law schools, and the second one is about multiple legal systems. So I agree with you that multiple legal systems where you have customary law and then state law are a real problem, because those can create huge injustices for mainly marginalized groups. But I think in some ways, I want to rephrase that and say, it's not an accident. We do not have customary law in contract, for instance. We don't have customary law in commercial law. So which are those things for which we decided to keep customary law? And why is it that those are the things that oppress women? And I think turning that question around is something that only strategic litigation can do, because it enables us to ask a question about the structure of the law itself and put it under a microscope, as opposed to kind of saying, well, but there is this one woman and her rights, and you might get very good outcomes. So you had lots of health cases that are amazing for this one woman, and they give them damages. But I think you need questions that interrogate the entire system and say, why is it that women have worse outcomes for health than men? And I think until we start asking those questions of structures, we cannot go forward. And the second one is with law schools. So yes, I totally hear you. They were, law schools are really bad for women. They're damaging. They cause women immense harm because of the ways in which they discriminate. But again, that is a structural issue around discrimination. So it is a structural issue around dealing with a discriminatory practice, so much in the same way as we had those earlier cases around disability and law schools failing to make any reasonable adjustments for students who were disabled and being taken to court in order for those demands to be met because people had rights. And I think that there is a lot of scope in order for us to make those demands, but also in order for us to shame law schools. So a place that calls itself a bastion of social justice cannot be a place that oppresses women. And I think that we have been very quiet in speaking out at the kinds of cultures that law schools are propagating. And I think that we need to be much more assertive about the ways in which we say law schools fail women in these ways and demand that law schools change, because they have changed in some ways. And this will be yet another change. They won't like it. It won't be easy. But I think that we can certainly make those demands now. So thanks very much. I know we're running out of time, so I'll let everybody have a go.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Over to you, Rumbidzai.
Thank you. I will answer this briefly because I actually have to go. I have something I need to rush to. But I mean, yeah, I totally agree that, you know, there are multiple layers of the human person has a multiplicity of factors that make them who they are, right? And because of that, even in the society that we exist in, I'll go into speaking to the question of intersectionality and how we bring our different sort of background identities into the work that we do, right? So there will be multiple layers of class, of educational background, of sexuality, of social status, wealth, of language, of location, the rural-urban divide, right? All these come into play when you look at how women lawyers, and here I'm not going to quote, I'm distinguishing between women lawyers and feminist lawyers, right? These factors would distinguish the way in which women lawyers will carry out their work versus the way the kind of feminist lawyers that we're trying to build would go about their work, right? Because of these different multiple identities that make up the different kinds of lawyers and ways in which these identities bring about a certain kind of politics in the way that the work that we do is done. The feminist lawyering would then require us to adopt a strategy of intersectionality, right? And I'll give you another example of how in many countries, when women's rights movements are preparing their reports, shadow reports to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, right? You'll find that in some instances, which happened in my country, there are certain groups of women that will be forced to present their own individual report, shadow report, because their issues are considered too political or too much away from the mainstream for them to be integrated into what represents the voice, right, of the women's movement. And here I'm speaking from experience because this actually happened during Zimbabwe's review in 2012. There were certain issues, like particularly for the LGBTQ community, they had to have a separate report that reflected their concerns about the ways in which the government was respecting their rights. And so, yeah, I guess at a basic level, what I'm trying to say is it is true that in some instances, the way in which women's rights do their work is differentiated by these different identities and how they lack an intersectional approach, which is why the feminist approach that takes all these factors into account is the ideal way of trying to go around, not even trying to go around, of disintegrating this system that separates people based on their different identities. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rumba, and I know you also have to run. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for being present. Thank you for being such a steady partner of ISLA and the network, and we honor you for giving us time. Please feel free to run to your next meeting. We know in this Zoom age that there's always another meeting, and we've also lost Dr. Sharifa, but that is fine. I'm going to rope in Dr. Ruth, who is the legal director at ISLA, and she's going to come in and help us answer some of these questions that are still outstanding. But for now, I'm just going to hand over to Annette, and then the next round of questions, because I see that they keep coming, Dr. Ruth is going to jump on and help answer them.
Thanks, Nobu. I think tying off to the question that was asked on what class has to do with matrimonial property. It has, marriage is a patriarchal institution where women know that they are protected due to what it offers. So I just needed to put that out there, that the way in which we conceive marriage, even though it is a lovey-dovey thing, it is intrinsically tied to class. So how do you join the network? And is it in Nigeria at the moment? So the Feminist Litigation Network is currently in a number of countries. which means that we're working with organizations and lawyers in Kenya, in Uganda, in Zanzibar. We're also working with organizations and lawyers in Malawi and in South Africa. We also expanded to Francophone West Africa, and I do know that naming it Francophone is very colonial, but we are in Cote d'Ivoire and we are in Burkina Faso. We are not per se limited to going into Nigeria. It's a matter of identifying suitable network partners. The way in which we identify partners is we do put out a call, which is usually preceded by a country visit where we go and meet interested partners. For example, if we are going into a new country, we will meet with a number of women's rights organizations who are using litigation as a tool for social change. Or sometimes we do work with organizations who are focused on legal aid as a program area, but do strategic litigation and are interested in establishing it as one of their program areas. The way in which we select our partners is it has to be an organization that, one, of course, wants to use litigation as a tool for social change. Two, does focus on women's rights areas broadly. Three, and very important, is able to politicize their work. As we said before, one of the hugest challenges that we have encountered is the depoliticization of the women's rights work. We do understand that a lot of women's rights organizations do work closely with government. So at the point at which we say that we are trying to hold states accountable for human rights violations, it can be quite disturbing because there are a lot of programmatic work that takes place with a lot of these CSOs with the government. So they have to be able to understand that the work is deeply political. And of course, they have to have a lawyer who is a woman and who is willing to and interested in using strategic litigation, feminist strategic litigation as a tool for social change, identifies it as one of their career plans personally, because we do understand that the lawyers that we work with may move to other organizations, may not forever be in that organization. So it has to be something that they are personally invested in. And these are conversations that take place during the consultative process. But we do understand that intrinsic to relationship building, we do understand a lot about what their organization's objectives are, what the lawyer's objectives are, what our objectives are, just to ensure that we're able to have a shared understanding of what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, where it needs to be done, who needs to be involved in what we're trying to do. So it's a whole process of trying to constantly ensure that we're all on the same page. I see someone asked whether men can be feminist lawyers. By all means, men can be anything they want to be. They can be feminist lawyers too. However, we are focused on working with women feminist lawyers, true to feminist knowledge production, true to feminist methodologies of creating change, is that we believe that it matters who speaks and whose knowledge is considered as knowledge, who is considered as an expert. And we approach women lawyers doing the work themselves as an upfront to the court as a patriarchal space. So no, we don't work with male litigators in the Feminist Litigation Network. And I see another question asked on whether we do work with trans issues. So we do work with trans issues. We do work with trans issues and LGBTI issues, and that's in our Sexual Rights Network. That's where the work is hosted. But within the Feminist Litigation Network, we focus on violence against women, and we focus on women's socioeconomic rights. What used to be women's land and property rights now expanded to include other sub-thematic areas as well.
Thank you so much, Annette, for those beautiful answers. There was a question that came up in the question and answer box, but it has since been removed. And I have a question. So there's a question here that has come back again from Comfort, and this is, I'm going to direct this question to Dr. Ruth. It says, our law offers a significant record of success, public interest litigation, some related to feminist issues. Is it possible to document these cases to enhance evidence-based advocacy for social change?
Hi, Comfort. It's a really good question. If I understand you correctly, you're speaking about strategic litigation cases that have been successful, and you're asking whether part of documenting that evidence can contribute to advancing advocacy. Yes, ISLA is also very intentional about documenting what's happening in the continent around strategic litigation, learning from other best practices. So I think this is great. Documenting is always a great idea. As part of our collaborations work, we'll be sending a link to all the participants in this meeting tomorrow or the day after, just to invite you, if you're willing to collaborate with ISLA or share more information, we'll be sending that link. So do fill that link, Comfort, and we'll be happy to chat further about some of the evidence that you're also documenting.
Whilst I have you here, Dr. Ruth, just there was another question that came up around how the issues that face women, they are legal, but they are economic. And is there any work around partnering with people that go beyond laws, around working with feminist economists and feminist financial gurus and experts?
Absolutely. So ISLA hosts a panel of experts called the ISLA Panel of Experts. And these are not just lawyers. These are people across disciplines, because we understand that the law doesn't exist or operate in a vacuum, right? So in all the different disciplines, patriarchy manifests in a type of way. And so we are always interested in learning from thinking and theories and philosophies that are occurring outside of the legal discipline. In fact, we think that's the most comprehensive way of thinking. So within our work, we really crave a relationship and interactions with people outside of the legal discipline. So kindly do fill in the collaborations link we'll share as well, and we'll be able to reach out to you irrespective of the discipline that you're in. The important thing is that, we know that patriarchy manifests across disciplines, and understanding how different theories and ways of learning can help us unpack it more is just a great part of what we do. And especially for socioeconomic rights, right? Because when we talk about women's socioeconomic rights, we're speaking about financial systems, about economic justice, about things that are really beyond just what you would consider as the legal discipline that impacts that area of law. So absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Ruth, sorry, I'm just checking to make sure that we have not missed any questions. And there was one from Chika who had a raised hand. And I'm just going to let our participants know that there's just one or two more questions left. This is your last chance to ask our experts any questions that you have. If Chika could please be unmuted and they ask their question.
Good afternoon, all.
Hi, Chika, we can hear you.
Yeah, good afternoon, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Very well, Chika, please proceed.
Thank you so much. Actually, my name is Chika. I'm a lawyer practicing in Lagos, Nigeria. However, I registered on this program. I just rushed back from court to join the program. Actually, I would have loved the organization to extend its network to Nigeria. Just as I said, I work with an NGO, and I have met a lot of women who have found themselves in this issue of domestic violence. The problem we have sometimes is that some of them we refuse to say. Some of them we call them, some of them will come along the line, they will withdraw because of the societal pressure or family pressure. Another thing I actually notice is that it's not only among the educated, uneducated, but also among the educated. I happen to be a victim of domestic violence, though I'm still working on the process of filing the case in court. A colleague of mine who happens to be a lawyer actually told me that I should forget about it and this and that. I said, no, it does not happen that way. So if this thing can happen to someone who is educated, then what will be the fate of the person who is uneducated? In an environment where we work, for instance, Yaba and along riverine areas, because we call them slum dwellers, a lot of issues of domestic violence, sometimes we report them to police. The police will not be able to carry out their work. Even the female police officers, at a point, they will be asking the woman, are you the only person being affected? So actually, my opinion is not about a question, but it's a kind of a suggestion, recommendation. In the sense that I'm suggesting that let there be massive advocacy concerning the issue of feminism. Because feminism is all about equality. I'm still soliciting, like Ruth, rightly, not Ruth. The other person said that Nigeria has not been, they have not been extended to Nigeria. I suggest that if there is a way that Nigeria should be part or extend the organization to Nigeria, I think it will be of a good benefit to the people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chika, and thank you for raising that. It is extremely crucial that we continue the work of advancing and growing more feminist litigators. And that is the work that ISLA is doing. And hopefully we will be able to get into many other countries in Africa, including Nigeria. And we're so excited that we had a few Nigerians on our call today. We see you, we honor you, and ISLA is ready to partner with all the feminist lawyers that want to make systemic changes in their spaces. And so now I'm just going to hand over to a feminist blogger that worked with us around the promotion of this publication. As you may know, that this is not just an ISLA event, this has been done in partnership with African Feminism, and they have been instrumental in helping us with working with these incredible young feminist bloggers. And so I'm just going to hand over to Kia Roma Mosata. I hope I did not butcher your name, Kia Roma, and over to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to, something. It was really exciting for me to work on something like this as a writer and also as a feminist. The work that ISLA is doing is very commendable, and it was exciting for me to, to read it and to spend time with it to find out the kind of work that the network has been doing over the past 3 years. And I really look forward to, watching the network's work grow, to watch it, extend to many other countries on the continent and to make a much bigger social change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kia. We have, if you can check our chat box, there is a link to Kia's article. Please feel free to go there, read it and check it out. And once you get off this call, you'll be able to access this article through following our various social media. And before I close, I'm just going to ask Annette if she has any final words, as well as Dr. Ruth.
Thank you so much. Final words are and I may be biased that the work that ISLA is trying to do, is doing, using strategic litigation, using feminism as a tool of analysis, as a methodology for social change is, if not inspiring, it's also revolutionary. And so it's been really inspiring to work through this. It's been really inspiring to know that there are donors, funders, partners, activists on the ground who are interested in working with us, who believe in the model. And as we continue to implement the second phase of the partnership, we're really excited to share the ways in which we have learned from the pilot phase towards making necessary changes, but also in trying to constantly improve the network model that we're working with. Thank you everyone who was able to join us. And thank you, Nobukosi, for facilitating this amazing conversation.
Thank you so much, Nobu. I've had so much fun. I think the one thing I learned when I was writing this publication for ISLA, just hearing, I interviewed so many partners, I interviewed so many staff at ISLA, and the one thing that was consistently true is just the level of commitment that exists for this model to work. And, you know, seeing it come to life and the people that appreciate it and get it, it really is worth it. It really is a worth it kind of journey. And yeah, really my pleasure being here and happy to see it come to life.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ruth. Thank you for reminding me what I forgot to state, that actually Dr. Ruth was very instrumental in drafting this publication. You are again invited to go. If you look at our chat box, there is the links that have been put up to access the publication, or if you follow us on our social media, on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, the places where people are social and it's media, you will be able to find all the links to the publication and any further questions that you may have. And so this brings us to the end of today's launch. Thank you so much for joining us. We do hope that we will see you again in 2 weeks, and that will be on the 19th of August, when we will be having our webinar on the litigating for reproductive justice under Article 14 of the Maputo Protocol. We are very excited about that, and we hope that you will join us. And if you do follow ISLA on various social media, you'll be able to keep up to date with all the work that we are doing. I saw a lot of questions that, well, how can we follow? How can we keep up to date? Just follow us on social media and you will be able to see different webinars that we have, different engagements that we have, and different opportunities for you to partner with us as well. Thank you everyone for attending. This was absolutely wonderful. See you again in 2 weeks. Goodbye.